Thanks, Edith. So my name is Doireann. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I met Nika, Paul and Elena, and how it came to be that we started to work together. First of all, I'd like to thank the Edith and the Edith Rose House for the stipendium. That the film wouldn't have been possible without it. And it's been really great to have the support of Edith in particular, who has really encouraged the making of the film and the whole process to get it to this point. So I'm really happy to show the film in this exhibition as well, which I think is a really kind of an interesting context for the work. There's several kind of relationships which will come out throughout the talk. Several of the artists in the show have inspired this work and my practice in general, so that's really great to be involved in a group show with them. And so this was like location scouting, visiting the Vandenbroek House, which is part of the Interbau project in Berlin in the Hanseviertel district. And why I was interested in the Hanseviertel district was the Interbau is a modernist project which was managed by Walter Gropius Bau, and it was a project which was a reaction to, it was built during the Cold War, around 55, 56, 57, and it was the West Berlin and West Germany's kind of reaction to Soviet architecture, and they wanted to kind of display the work of Western architects in a utopian modernist project. And I found that interesting just as a backdrop in relation to kind of architecture and the body, and kind of beginning to explore notions of the body as an architecture. So we went on several location visits and eventually chose this house. And it was by coincidence that I have a friend who runs a film night in Berlin, and I was talking to him about it, and he was really interested in the project and supported it quite early on. And the realization just happened that he lives in this house, and it was kind of like serendipitous. And so it was possible then that we could shoot there. And he also asked his neighbor, who was kind enough to allow us to shoot in his apartment for a weekend. Here's just some more shots of it. And I found it interesting as well, kind of there's a lot of subtext within many aspects of the work, which for me are quite important. Like, for example, Le Corbusier, a lot of his modular architecture, the measurements and the calculations were around the ideal measurements of male proportions, which were like 1 meter 6, no, 2 meter 6, which is, no, 1 meter 6, sorry. And I just found some of these kind of relationships between the proportions of the body and modernist architecture quite interesting. And there's also connections to sacred geometry as well, but which Le Corbusier has been kind of discredited for, but anyway, that's just a side note. Here's some more views. To the left is Niemeyer, the Brazilian architect, which features in the section where Paul walks through the buildings. I guess specifically relating to architecture, we began to do reading groups, myself, Paul and Nika, together. We read some of Preciado's texts, and then there was a kind of a secondary notion of like the construction of gender around in the 50s that Preciado has written about a lot in Testa Junkie, and the kind of creation of the relationship between the biopolitical and architecture and gender in the body, and we found this quite interesting to kind of locate it within a kind of a utopian architectural setting. I think you want to maybe you were going to read a quote from.
I can read the quote also. Well, what I think is it's interesting is like the historical constructions of gender that happened at the same time as the buildings that were built in the 50s. So maybe I can read the quote. Yeah. So the invention of the category gender signaled the splitting off and became the source point for the emergence of the pharmacopornographic regime for producing and governing sexuality. Far from its being the creation of a feminist agenda, the notion of gender belongs to the biotechnological discourse that appeared in the US medical and therapeutic industries at the end of the 1940s. Gender and pharmacopornographic masculinity and femininity are artifacts that originated with industrial capitalism and would reach commercial peaks during the Cold War. Just like canned food, computers, plastic chairs, nuclear energy, television, credit cards, disposable ballpoint pens, barcodes, inflatable mattresses, or telecommunication satellites.
And Preciado kind of traces a kind of a path between the development of the construction of gender in relation to also capitalism and the production of the mass production of products and also of biotechnology. The kind of weapons industry in the Cold War, McCarthyism, kind of fear-mongering, and the construction of kind of human identity and gender, which is, I think, very interesting in relation to the creation of the kind of illusions of subjectivity within democracy. But so we began to do, as I said, kind of reading material together, and we would share material online, and we started to read Preciado and also Donna Haraway, and also I became quite interested in Catherine Hales, how we became post-human, and the kind of history of cybernetics. The beginning of the film, I'm going to show a clip from the film now, but the beginning, when the first scene where Nika is introduced at the computer screen, the text from that was a kind of a sub-up of The Imitation Game by Alan Turing, where he created an experiment which was basically a man, a woman, and a computer, and the person that it was being tapped would have to kind of guess the answers. The man, the woman, and the computer would have to guess the answers to a set of questions. And what that kind of hypothesis for that was that what cybernetics drew from it was the question around, can machines have consciousness, and can computers think? And that was kind of like, for the next 4 or 5 decades, the crux of the development of artificial intelligence and ethical questions around machines' consciousness, and what we're kind of experiencing now with advanced kind of Google apps and stuff like this. And the development of artificial intelligence. But that actual text, which I will just play now,
except for two computer terminals flickering in the dim light. You use the terminals to communicate with two entities in another room whom you cannot see. Relying solely on their responses to your questions, you must decide which is the man, which is the woman. As you gaze at the flickering signifiers scrolling down the computer screens, no matter what identifications you assign to the embodied entities that you cannot see, you have already become a ghost human.
So yeah, that's very specifically about the imitation game, which I plan to create a scene where two of the protagonists actually take part in the experiment. But I wanted to put it in there as a kind of a reference in the beginning, because it's important for the development of kind of two of the main themes in the film are cyberspace, cybernetics, and psychoanalysis as kind of two vehicles for the mind or for consciousness to kind of live within, and also then gender embodiment. And what Turing's imitation game did was also, on a secondary level, not just bring out the kind of conceptualization of can machines think our consciousness, but also, well, who can think and what is gender? Because if you cannot tell the difference between the male and the female answers either, well then what exactly is gender embodiment? But that was kind of written out of cybernetics until Catherine Hales brought it into her essay, How We Became Post-Human, which I found really interesting. Because Turing also was like a systems biologist as well as a cyberneticist, and he was kind of making a lot of experiments around embodiment, and he pushed the development of like disembodiment from computers to the point of making computers where we're disembodied somehow from the cyberspace. Yeah, and it's kind of also interesting that he was arrested for being homosexual, and he was given testosterone as a treatment to apparently treat his homosexuality, which had kind of disastrous effects, and eventually it's thought that he committed suicide with cyanide, but that's not really. Anyway, it's kind of open for debate, but yeah, that's just a side note. And then the next section is I wanted to bring in a little bit about genetics and developments within genetic variation and research into genetic variation, where it's now being discovered that there are up to 5 chromosome pairings rather than 2. Which shows that there's kind of variation within chromosome and DNA structures. So kind of on a very very basic level I introduced it, but I also wanted to introduce kind of notions of structures and systems and the underlying scientific kind of patterns and biological patterns within the body and systems within different kind of architectures. So
humans are born with 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. The X and Y chromosomes determine a person's sex. Most women are 46XX, and most men are 46XY. Research suggests, however, that in a few births per 1,000, some individuals will be born with a single-sex chromosome, 45X, or 45Y, sex monosomy, and some with 3 or more sex chromosomes, 47XXX, 47XYY, or 47XXY, etc. Sex polysomy. In addition, some males are born with 46XX due to.
So then, as if you've seen the film, then on the left and the right screen, there are the 3D scans rotating. Yeah, and that developed kind of parallel to how the structure of the film was developing. I also was doing 3D scans, first of all with Nika, and this is Olaf, who's a photographer, and he is, we were talking about 3D scanning, and he's really interested in it, so he also offered that he would do the scanning. So we started to do that, and so it was connected to this kind of idea of building a body and constructing the kind of like characters as well. And then it kind of started to transpire that Nika is an artist and also works with 3D. And I started to kind of align that with the possibility that he as a protagonist would be creating the other characters in the film. So I quite liked this just very basic shell-like structure, which eventually led to this more metallic structure, which kind of relates to the uranium in the computers, which ironically, or coincidentally, Johannes Paul Rather, who's in the show, he's made a new piece where this substance is kind of part of a new installation, which also comments on the interior of computers and that substance, which is kind of just coincidental, which I also like. So I just included this as well because initially the basic kind of outline of the film is there, and yeah, I'm just going to read that for you actually. So the characters pass each other on the corridors of a modernist high-rise in Berlin. The camera observes them as though in a science fiction dream, following a character into a laboratory where they are being programmed and tested by an automated computer. One character is in a doctor's office, the other in a psychiatrist's office, undergoing analysis and physical observation. Another is describing his dreams to a Jungian analyst. We observe a character being built inside a 3D workspace. The building appears to be in an institute for the development of trans male subjects, possibly AI, as we are uncertain who is real and what is truth. The film focuses on a group of young female to male transgender protagonists who are at different stages of transitioning. The film observes sessions with a Jungian psychoanalyst. Each character describes his dream, physical transformation, and relationship between the inner and outer worlds. So this is a very early script and or synopsis and how it was developing. But for me, what became interesting was that my relationship to each of the protagonists and each kind of there was so many different elements that kind of just started to like construct their character within the film, and also the construction of those scenes. For example, this studio that Nika's in kind of transpired from talking about like the construction of making art as well, and that kind of research process. And I thought it'd be interesting that he's in a studio and creating work, and I think there's a lot of relationships between making work and transformation, which, yeah, so some of the images there are of Nika and are Nika's images. There's also, I'll just bring that up.
Translocation of cultures, for example, in which greater gender diversity and sex and gender are not always.
Yeah, so here is Ashley Hans Schreil, who's a psychoanalyst, and he is an artist, a visual artist who teaches in Vienna, and also in the 80s was a filmmaker. And yeah, he made these quite radical lesbian, trans, science fiction animation films, which were pretty radical. And one is called Dandy Dust, and the other one is called Flaming Years, which I had seen years ago and had VHS copies of them that were like pretty bad. And then myself and Paul in the summer last year went to actually it was an auction for the Institute of Queer Theory in Berlin, who Pauline and Renata are involved in, and they were there, and Hans was there, Ashley was there, and we were talking to Ashley because Paul was in a film with Julie Shu and their friends. And then afterwards I thought, oh, I'd really like if Ashley was in the film. So I wrote to Ashley, but I didn't get any response until a week before the shooting. I had already asked someone else to play the role of the psychoanalyst, who's a queer cabaret performer in Berlin, who I would really like to work with, but Ashley was really the kind of my first choice. And so a week before, Ashley wrote and said, yeah, I'd like to do it, when will I come? So Ashley arrived on like the Friday, the morning of the shoot, and that's how that transpired, that Ashley's in the film. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. So yeah, several of those images, also some of those images were Paul's as well on the wall. And in the studio we placed also some kind of cut and paste poems that were there, because we also did some writing together as well. For Paul's part, for example, that's all mainly Paul's writing. And we're both very interested in cut and paste techniques, and Kathy Acker and Burroughs. And so we placed some kind of like cut up poems there as well. And also there was a text that you had introduced that was about how testosterone affects the brain, which was published 2 years ago in Vienna also. And it was kind of about how testosterone affects language, and that kind of led into this scene with Elena as well. Mm-hmm. So then last year in the summer, I had been going to Andreas, who's a Jungian analyst, and I had joined, he does a dream analysis workshop in Berlin, and I had joined that, as I dream quite a lot and I'm very interested in documenting them and analysing them. And then I asked him, would he be interested in having a workshop with us? And so we had a workshop with Andreas in Berlin to analyse our dreams. And then there was 2 other protagonists, but it became kind of apparent that Paul also dreams a lot, and we started to analyse, and also Nika's dreams, so we started to analyse, and there was a lot of hybridization in the dreams, which was like combinations of different kind of animals and also like body parts, which were kind of transformer like reconstructed in the dreams. So that became quite interesting, and then we did a workshop. So maybe a little bit before, and then the 3D scans I also made with Elena. And Nika and Paul. Yeah, Paul's kind of directly related to looking at the phone and the kind of the mirror and the cyberspace within the phone. Yeah, so this is Andreas that we did the dream analysis with. There was also more participants as well. And this is location scouting in Tiergarten. So we've actually shot quite a lot more than what's in the film. I plan on developing it into kind of a series of installations and perhaps a feature film, or a long film. I wouldn't say a feature in terms of the narration, but a longer film. So there is some scenes around this green lake with Paul and Nika, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, actually. So this is just at the public toilet in Tiergarten. I thought it was interesting about this public toilet on different levels. I mean, also on two kind of levels that I wanted to subtly bring in. One was about sexuality and about gay male cruising. Also then the kind of secondary possibility was just this kind of political element of the public toilet discourse that's happening within trans politics in the States, and so it was just kind of a subtle reference to that. This is a pre-production picture. So the Jungian analysis, why I found it quite interesting, it wasn't so specific that I'm really interested in Jungian analysis, but I wanted to explore the kind of parallel between the world of kind of symbols and alchemy and archetypes that kind of in contemporary culture were kind of a bit cut off from the inner workings of the mind, and I still find psychoanalysis has the potential to kind of reveal a lot of these through dreams, and Jungian particularly still has a lot of kind of like interesting tools to explore those. So within the workshops we each analyze some of our dreams, and they're in the film. So Paul's dream is in the film. The dream with the tongue falling out, which Elena performs, was actually a dream that I had. Oh yeah, the tentacles as well was another dream that I had in 2014 or 15 that I put in that original script that I started to develop the content from. And I'm also really interested in feminist science fiction, and Octavia Butler writes a lot about tentacles in a series called Lilith's Brood, where there's humans that are rescued by an alien race who have kind of Medusa-like tentacles, and I think the tentacles are kind of like a reference to like non-human relations between energy, between objects, between plants, between auras, these kind of like I'm not sure if that's making sense, but for me it was kind of an interesting also towards kind of like the extension of the body, so that
sensation of seeing your body change on testosterone in slow motion, or perhaps in fast forward.
Of cultures from the different cultures.
The light shines through it and the dark enters it. I looked down and saw 2 long tentacles growing from your stomach. The skin was realistically mimetic. The sensation of seeing your body change on testosterone in slow motion, or perhaps in fast forward, as though in some other time dimension. Biology will never be complete. Constantly evolving with biotechnology, morphing into new species, human-machine hybrids.
Dreams are the realm of irrationality and unpredictability. Yet the symbols, images, and features recurring in them in a cycle of transformation, dissolution and renewal that reminds us of the work of the alchemists.
Just wanted to comment about the silver bowl. So within visual effects, when you want to map an area for later putting in a visual effect, you put the silver bowl in so it maps the light. And there are many parts in the film that I want to add visual effects, but at the moment the budget hasn't really allowed for that. But I also find it quite interesting to leave the silver bowl there as a kind of a reference to illusion as well, and illusion within filmmaking and within science fiction films. So I thought there's a lot of references to illusions within the props and within the set as well. So I'm just going to play a little bit more with Ashley's reflection on dreams, because it kind of starts to set up this parallel between psychoanalysis and alchemy, and touring and cybernetics.
Cycle of transformation, dissolution and renewal that reminds us of the work of the alchemists somehow also represent a universal, comprehensive language that we can interpret, a code that we can break, like Turing did with Enigma, and reprogram again and again, allowing us to visit fantastic worlds, to travel in time and space. Hybridization seems to be a recurring theme in your dreams. Shall we talk a bit more about the dream you had last week? It appears similar to one of those TV series where the family was the central focus.
Okay.
What was the light, the atmosphere?
It was quite dark, with shadows, a bit greenish.
What happened next?
There were some mutant animals over the swimming pool.
So this was also on the left screen, Paul's going down in the elevator, and it was kind of a reference
butterflies,
to going down into the unconscious, and the kind of structure, the Freudian structure of the house and the attic being the brain, and then the unconscious is further down in the basement.
There are different ways to approach the dream. There are two levels. The native level, familiar to you, being closer to consciousness. There are some unusual things on this level.
So this was the
But they're still
reflection
being dealt
from
with
the Jungian
physical
analyst,
reality.
which I transcribed into the dream.
Of your dead father. And then the level of hybridization, belonging to the world of ancestors. Hybrids are very interesting creatures because they are like the embodiment of symbols. In alchemy, they use the symbol of monsters. The symbol is the best way to express what is unthinkable.
So here, for me, there's two elements that I'd like to talk about, and one is the first is kind of symbol of the monster, and within transgender history, the symbol of the monster has kind of keeps reappearing, or is kind of like constructed, let's say, throughout history, like the hermaphrodite in Greek mythology, and also androgen and the androgynous character, and also like Frankenstein. And so it's often been like projected as this kind of monstrous character. And what I kind of was interested in is that how any kind of transgression of the gender binary often was manifested as a kind of a monstrous character. And it was interesting that Andreas, in his Jungian analysis, also reflected on that, and then kind of made an analysis which I thought was quite problematic, but I wanted it to be in the film because I wanted many things to kind of maybe even provoke people to question more rather than to kind of say, you know, this is a concrete analysis. And for me, it's kind of the breaking away of this type of traditional view of the binary, and also of this kind of dichotomy of like male and female in the one body, which I don't agree with.